So I found this really interesting article on PCGamer.com. Stealth is everywhere in games, but the innovations of Thief have been forgotten. I don't know about you guys, but I really like stealth games, although I do prefer the ones where it's not the only option. I find it a little kind of limiting when you have to do stealth no matter what. Just because the game, basically the game's always going to know what you're doing. But anyway, I'll link this article here if you want to read it for yourself. I'm going to kind of gloss over most of it. But keeping quiet and concealed in the shadow is no longer in vogue, which makes Thief a refreshing replay. The guy talks about, gives a good description of like the noises and stuff. Talks about how, being the first ever PC stealth game, Thief, the Dark Project is a surprisingly effective horror experience. He talks about the sounds, and basically it kind of provides almost a Pavlovian type of response in people and everything. And they talk about Looking Glass sound designer Eric Brocious recalled in a 2011 interview with MIT's Gambit Game Lab that the thing we were keenly aware of was that it was going to be the first stealth game that was really going to rely on audio cues. Then it talks about how the mini guards who threaten to bring their blades to bear on your crouched arse are almost always obscured by the maze-like monk punk world around you. The U-bends of tight Italian-inspired streets and sewers, just close walls of boudoirs and pantries, and that ever-present blanket of gloom. As such, your best bet is to keep your ears open for the sound of a sellsword clearing his throat. Basically, you got to use the audio cues to kind of get around and find your way around the game and stuff. Which is one of the things that made the game extremely interesting, extremely cool and innovative, unique when it first came out. And he talks about the noisemaker. Brocious built Thief's soundtrack from simple droning loops that in some cases were just 4 seconds long. Of course, while sound might be the first tool an opponent a Thief player needs to master, altered by noisemakers and moss arrows, which can carpet that pesky marble and dampen your tread, it's matched in significance by light. Because that's the other thing. There was a lot of, you got to hide in the shadows and things of that nature. Every shadow in this medieval noir story serves a greater than stylistic purpose, granting you a pitch-black path to safety or an unseen vantage point from which to watch your enemies. You're playing this essentially voyeuristic role. Greg LaPiccolo told MIT Gambit in 2011, "We were going up against Doom, which is boom, boom, boom all the time. Could we make a game where you would be entertained by just standing for a minute someplace and doing nothing? Just watching some dude walk around the corner and wondering how long it will be before he comes back the other way. That was not a foregone conclusion that was going to work when we started." And Thief's formula came late after massive staff turnover. The Dark Project's lead artist and lead programmer quit during production, as did Levine, which left the co-founder Irrational Games. They talk about some more, basically what has happened since then. And then here they talk some about the light. Because those systems I devoted hundreds of words to, the second to none sound design, the light and the dark, have largely been left behind by modern game design. Oh sure, there are plenty of partial tributes as a mood piece. Dishonored is almost a spitting image of Thief, and factors noise into its stealth. Irrational Swan Song, the Bioshock Infinite DLC Burial at Sea Part 2, laced its levels with broken glass and puddles in order to force you to think about surfaces. Fallout 3, led by Thief veteran Emil Pagaluruo, introduced a multi-stage enemy detection now standard in Bethesda RPGs. Then there's Ubisoft's Ghost Recon games, at this point the closest living relative to Splinter Cell, which still simulate hiding in shadow. And this year's Modern Warfare 2 hands a huge advantage to players who stop and listen for opponents' footsteps in multiplayer. That's a whole other story, because it's like, it's not nearly the same, but I get what he's coming from. As a general rule, line of sight is now the defining consideration of stealth sequences. Sneaking is most often a supplementary mechanic in games that also encompass all-out action. In that context, developing a detection model as detailed as the Looking Glass one could be considered needless extra work. That's exactly why you don't see it very often. Not to mention confusing for players who only periodically engage with it. Maybe, I don't know. As a consequence, stealth is at once everywhere and less advanced than it was 24 years ago, which is sad, to be honest. But also at the same time, they've made somewhat similar games to Thief. Probably not as good, because I haven't played many of them. But also, the last time I played Thief was probably 10 plus years ago, so I might be remembering it with the rose-colored glasses, or however you want to describe it. But, I don't know how well a stealth game would sell now. I personally think it would sell pretty well, but, I don't know. Would it be worth the effort? Maybe. But anyway, perhaps it's for the best that AAA games today serve the needs of the majority, allowing them the friction of slipping by a patrol or triggering a takedown on a close guard without demanding mastery over multiple fiddly systems. Thief was always a niche hit, and indie successors like Gloomwood exists to satisfy its old audience. Yet returning to the Dark Project remains a bracing and brilliant experience, the kind of cold shower or freezing bath in a wine cellar that makes you feel alive. So in the article, I kind of, like I said, I glossed over some of it, but I'll link it in the description box if you want to read this whole thing for yourself. It's really interesting to think about that, he's right, and that, like, right when he says right here, stealth is at once everywhere, but also less advanced than it was 24 years ago, which is really crazy to think about. It's like games now are so much more advanced, so much more innovative, quote unquote, than they were back then. But then you say, okay, not really though, because there hasn't been games that come out, even games like, like say a Deus Ex. I always love those types of games. Human Revolution and stuff. That one I kind of go stealthy with, but at the same time, I don't have to if I don't want to, which is kind of what I prefer. But I know some people want to go just straight stealth, and it's, I mean, teach their own. I don't want to sit here and tell people how to play their games or whatever. I just, you would like to think that more of these indie developers would get a hold of like an Unreal Engine 5 or something and make more games that are like Thief. Because there's no excuse nowadays that you can use your Unreal 5 or whatever type of engine you want to make games that were like the old ones. And so if you don't have to use the 8-bit pixels, the 16-bit, or what, all that kind of stuff. You don't have to do that kind of stuff if you don't want to, because that is extremely limiting. Although at the same time, it's also probably cheaper. I'm not, but anyways, here and there, I'm starting to ramble a little bit, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. I just thought this article was really interesting. I was always a fan of Thief when it first came out. In a way, it's hard to believe it's been 25 years, basically. It's like, Jesus Christ, but anyway, whatever. Like I said, I'll link this in the description box. Thank you very much for watching, and have a good one.